Welcome back to another episode of the Speak for Yourself podcast. I'm Casey, and I'm so glad that you're here. It's been a hot minute since we've been here. It's been 4 or 5 weeks. I had a back issue at first, and then I got over that. And about 2 or 3 days later, I caught a stomach bug, and I ended up having like highly inflamed intestines after I got over the bug, and it caused a lot of stomach pain for about 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that afterwards. So it's been dealing with a lot of health issues, but we are back in the full swing of things. And I am so happy to bring on our next guest. Please welcome Christina. Hey,
Thank
Christina.
you. Hi.
And you are better known on Twitter as Radix Verum. Is it
Yes,
Verum or
that's
Verum?
right. Radix Verum is fine.
So my very first question, and I could have maybe looked this up, but I want to know what the Twitter handle is from.
Why it's not Radix?
No, what Radix Verum is.
Oh, okay. So
I feel like it's something I could have looked up, but I wanted the surprise.
you could have looked it up. It's Latin for the root of truth.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which I
dig
thought
that a
was
lot.
so cute. So like it used to be my my username like years and years ago online, and it was sort of like a pen name for a while before I was doxxed. So it's just kind of stuck, It's
Yeah,
one of
I
those
love it.
things
That's
that
awesome.
yeah, it's not going away.
I like it better now that I know the meaning for sure.
Really?
I liked it before, now I like it more. So can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I used to work in law, and I've been an independent journalist for a while, and now I am a filmmaker. And I like to kind of report on things that I think are underreported or things that I feel like I kind of tend to focus on government corruption because I feel like right now we have this big national security apparatus, but none of these agencies have any accountability or transparency. And there's nobody watching them, right? They're watching us, but no one's watching them. And I feel like somebody should be watching them.
Well, that's always been the main purpose of journalism, to be honest, before it itself was corrupt,
Yes, that's right.
Journalists and, legacy media. So now it's kind of upon the shoulders of the independent journalists.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's not, journalism isn't about speaking truth to power anymore. It's a corporate job now. And I think that the landscape has changed, not just because of technology, but because of corporate consolidation. So a lot of these corporate media, legacy media outlets, they're basically owned by like the same parent companies. There's like these like 6 multinational conglomerates that own these companies. And so when you think about it in that sense, that's really like a lot of control over the narrative, right?
Sure.
Yeah. But I think that that's failing now. I think that things are changing. So, yeah.
Well, so how long have you been in the business of independent journalism, and what made you change? You said you're in law before that.
Mm-hmm.
What made you switch?
Well, it's a long story, but basically, I didn't like working in law. You go into it. So, like when I was young, I was in the criminal justice program in high school,
Mhm.
and I really liked the idea of, justice and like uh, holding the powerful accountable and stuff. And I thought that that's like how the legal system worked. Everybody grows up watching like Law and Order and CSI, and you kind of like have this idea that like law enforcement is always portrayed so positively, I think, in our media. So anyways, I kind of like went into it thinking that you're going to be facilitating justice, and then you realize it's a racket, right? And it's like a very corrupt entity, and you see the politics of it and the industrial complex of it, like the prison industrial complex and all of that. And it's like, oh, well, that's not helpful. So I think that being, just somebody that's like speaking about things from that perspective is interesting. I don't know. So I've been doing this for several years now.
Okay. And, you kind of went from law to journalism, and now you're saying into making documentaries.
Yeah.
So is
Yeah.
that the natural progression from journalism?
I think so. I think it's part of it, right? So I don't think that journalism is just like written form. I think that it can take many forms. And right now, we're in I think an age where people don't read anymore. People read like headlines and maybe they'll read like the first paragraph, but I feel like people don't really read and digest long form content, and like unless they really want to, most people just scan the headlines and they're not getting the full story. So I think now to tell a story, especially one that is complex, it takes a movie format to keep people engaged and to really understand the story.
So when is the documentary coming out?
I don't have a set date for release, but I have been saying ideally I would like to have it done by the end of the year, but that's 6 more months and I still have a bunch of places to travel to, so I'm not sure how realistic that is. But
Well, I'm
that's
sure
kind
that's
of like
a bunch of work.
yeah, that's the goal I set for myself, and it's just it's a lot.
Well, we do have the trailer for it, but I think we're getting ahead of ourselves because I kind of want to set the stage and talk about what the documentary is about before we get there.
Yes.
So I know that you cover more than this, but I first heard you in a Twitter space, I think with the redheaded libertarian, and you were talking about the Whitmer case.
Yes.
And that is also what this documentary is about.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
how did you get involved with that specifically and so deeply?
Yeah, so it's crazy. When this first happened in October of 2020, like when the story first came out and these guys were arrested, if you remember, like Gretchen Whitmer did this press conference the next day, and they kind of announced this narrative of these like right-wing extremist militia guys, white supremacist domestic terrorists that were being arrested for conspiring to kidnap her. And immediately you're like, well, that's a little audacious, right? So of course you want to look into it. And just the way that it was being portrayed in the media, the immediate pouncing on, seizing on, we already have this pre-established narrative of this. And right before the election, right? It's 1 month before the election. So the whole thing seems suspicious. And I think, around that time, I had been researching like PatCon. And I just kind of looked at this and I was like, So I started just following the case and kind of reporting on it myself. But I didn't follow it initially as closely as some others did. It wasn't until BuzzFeed, Jessica Garrison of BuzzFeed, did this first article where she dropped that there were 12 informants used in the case, and like 2 undercover agents. So once she put that out, I started following it more closely and I started reporting on it myself. This was still well in advance of it going to trial. So I listened into the trial and I did my best to actually like transcribe what was being said as it was being said, which is kind of crazy. But anyway, so there was just something about the story that seemed, if you're going to call this the biggest like DT case in a generation and you're going to allege this big plot and conspiracy and you're going to arrest 14 guys, you have to have the evidence to back that up, right? So when you start looking into it, and if you look into it in any meaningful way, it's very clear immediately that the official narrative itself does not make sense and is constantly kind of changing. what they allege initially is vastly different from like what they actually try to present at trial. And so I think there might be a number of reasons for that. But in any case, it just caught my eye. So I started reporting on it. And then after the first trial ended in no convictions for the government, with 2 men being acquitted, found not guilty, Brandon Caserta and Daniel Harris, and then the jury having a mistrial to Adam and Barry. After that, I interviewed Brandon, and I thought I had a really good understanding of the story, having literally listened in to everything as it happened. And talking to Brandon, I started learning more, and I'm like, yeah, nobody knows the truth about this story. There's so much people don't know. Like, we have to get your story out there in a way that, tells the story. Like, we have to do something because nobody is talking about this. Nobody seems to care. And so I just went down to interview him, and it turned into a documentary.
Yeah.
So it's become a major, it's been crazy. It's been a journey, I guess.
Yeah, I bet. So you mentioned earlier that what they alleged at the beginning and then what they presented at trial were completely different. Can you go into that a little bit?
Sure. So, like, their story is bizarre. What is the narrative, right? So, how were they going to kidnap her? They're charged with conspiracy to kidnap. Then they add a superseding indictment, and they add WMD charges to some of the defendants, not all of them. And they first said that they were conspiring to kidnap and kill her. But the way that they were going to do that changed. Then they said that they were trying to overthrow the government. Then they said that they were trying to overthrow state governments, and they were going to storm capitals, like with a contingent of 200 men. They said that they were going to somehow like take her in a boat to like Wisconsin and have a citizen's arrest and like a citizen's trial. Then they said that they were going to execute her. But like the story, it's not coherent, and it's constantly, well, which is it? They're doing all of these things? Really? How? No, it doesn't make sense. And the WMDs
it's changed between
themselves,
each person that took the stand and gave testimony.
It constantly is changing. And then there's the omissions, right? Which is another key aspect to this. Like, if you read the criminal complaint, there is no mention of the role of the informants who led the entire thing. They make it seem like these people came together like organically, and there was this plot that they just kind of foiled. And that's not what happened. And they can't even claim that that's what happened, because as soon as their informants take the stand and start talking, they have to admit that they took leadership roles in the group, which they're admonished not to do, but they were doing. And then it comes out that, the FBI is like running these groups. They're planning the entire thing. It's so clear from everything that came out at discovery that that's what happened. That they had to resort to sort of like a kangaroo court, trying these guys in the court of public opinion, and trying to tie them to Trump and claim that they were like radicalized Trump supporters when they weren't. Just kind of crazy things like that. And then the WMDs, what were the WMDs? Was it they claimed towards the end of this that they wanted to purchase explosives from an undercover agent, UCE Red, which is Special Agent Timothy Bates. But nobody gave money to this guy for a down payment for an explosive. So was that the WMDs? Or because then they say they had like unregistered destructive devices. What's a destructive device? Like, what meets the legal definition of that, right? So they'll talk about a firework that was purchased legally around the 4th of July by Barry. Barry lights off fireworks every single year. You can ask his neighbors. He always does it. So he had this firework. I forget the name for it, but I think it was like the presidential or something. It had some silly name like this. And one of these FTXs, Barry tapes pennies to the back. He's trying to weigh it down and kind of make a makeshift flashbang for the guys for their training. The government alleges that he was trying to turn it into like an IED, basically, and that the pennies were supposed to be some kind of shrapnel. And they try to bolster this by playing this audio of him where he's talking about the watch out for the pennies. They're going to fly off of there and they could be so hot that they could like put, they could go right through your leg or something. But he, according to Barry, he's telling people like this could happen, just be careful. He's telling them as they're training. He's not suggesting that like they're making an IED or something. So then they say that they put like black powder in a balloon with BBs or something, and then put the balloon in an oven and tried to detonate it, and it like smoked and went poof. Is that an unregistered destructive device? Really? It's like you have a bunch of guys that are like stoned and drunk, and they're with a group of other guys. They're trying to be cool and impress each other. So they're trying to like blow some things up, but we're not.
That just sounds like a redneck Tuesday.
It's exactly. It's like, this is stuff that like my brother-in-law used to do all the time in Loxahatchee, but it's just like, this is not what a normal person would think of when you think of IED or WMDs. It's like nonsensical. And so there were like several people wearing wires there they even got these guys like on film. They were filming. They had photographers like at these FTXs. So it's like, what are we supposed to be scared of? This is a destructive device, really? Or is it a pyrotechnic? Like, is the firework a pyrotechnic? And is that legally classifiable as an unregistered destructive device? I actually don't think it meets the legal definition and standard of that. So I think that's interesting. I think it's considered technically a pyrotechnic. I don't know if taping the pennies on it changes that. And now it's magically an IED. But it's like, it's just silly stuff like this. We're going to throw these guys in prison for 20 years for that. It's nonsensical.
Yeah, it sounds like it's quite of a reach, and they're just trying to slap these guys with whatever charges they can find. The first thing that came to mind whenever you said WMD and you started explaining it was, I was thinking of a Fed making a purchase from another Fed, and it's like that that Spider-Man meme where they're like pointing at each other, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's funny because the government alleges that like this Luther, I think it's the Luther FTX, they allege that there's this meeting that occurs with some of these guys and mostly informants, right? So at least several people are there wearing recording devices, and they say that they create a circle of trust. And informant Dan Chappell, the main informant who has become second in command of the Wolverine Watchmen, but really the de facto leader of the so-called militia group, he's the one that's really carrying out the tactical training and stuff like that. He introduces Special Agent Timothy Bates, UCE Red, I think towards it's either August or September, because it's like they want to start the FBI wants to start wrapping this up because they themselves have set, I believe, a time limit of, we want to wrap this up before the election because I think it's done to influence the election.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So they're like, these guys aren't doing anything. The group is splintering, right? Paul Bellar has left in, I think, June or July of 2020. He moves to South Carolina. He's evicted from his home. He moves in with his father. So, the group is splintering. And then the FBI says, oh, no, we've got to stop that. We've got to bring people back together. We need to convince Barry he has good ideas, and we need to convince other people that he's the one that brought them together, not the FBI and their informants. So it's just kind of like, it's goofy like this. There's nothing they can show. Like, so for all of the thousands of hours of recordings and all of this data that they've pulled, they had surveillance on these guys for a long time prior to the official opening of like the Wolverine Watchman investigation. So some of these guys had been targets of different field offices or on their radar like for maybe 9 months prior, which is interesting. So they would have had all of their communications, and we're talking about terabytes of data. From all of that, you can't show us an audio of an agreement of everybody, these defendants that are co-conspirators. There's nothing of them on audio agreeing to a kidnapping. If there was, we all would have heard it. It had been played 1,000 times. That doesn't exist.
And that's for all the defendants?
Yes. In fact, what we do have is the opposite. So we have like Daniel Harris saying things like, this is picked up by an informant July 7th of 2020. He says, this is Daniel Harris saying, we are not going to be the aggressors in Michigan. The only time I think it will be reliable to be the aggressor is if there is a no shit effing civil war and it is being broadcasted. There's a statement where he says here on the 23rd of the same month, their ideas are improbable and impractical. We shot it down pretty quickly. Daniel Harris says, no, shut up. We're not Frank. He's referring to Frank Butler. This was picked up on Munith at the Munith FTX, where he is rejecting the government's attempts to entrap him into a kidnapping, where these informants would say kind of crazy stuff, or they would bring up things like this. And you have these defendants saying, no, we're not Frank. So Frank was a disabled Vietnam veteran from Virginia, who was the Virginia target. And the FBI was trying to get him to, they were trying to get him to recruit people into a plot to kidnap and kill Ralph Northam. And Frank so the FBI called a nationwide meetup of militia groups at one point during this at Dublin, Ohio in June of 2020. And Frank was there, and he was basically talking crazy after these informants were riling him up. He was talking about how he wanted to shoot people, not just Ralph Northam, but basically anyone that had pissed him off, because he's, an elderly man. He's a disabled veteran. They're giving him booze and weed. And so they're getting him riled up, and then they're asking him hypothetical questions, like, hypothetically speaking, when would it be okay to use violence and things like this? But they get him riled up and they say crazy stuff. So Dan is saying here at the Munith FTX, no, shut up. We're not Frank Butler. He basically saying people that are suggesting, that are doing crazy talk. Here's Dan Harris saying, no snatch and grab, I swear to God. So they're saying, like, no, we shut them down pretty quickly. What he was talking about was Frank Butler, but Frank was basically just reiterating things that the other informants had been basically manipulating him into saying. So that would be the opposite. Like, that does not show an intent to engage or conspire to kidnap. What it does show is that the FBI stitched together a group of people, brought people together, introduced informants, and then had these informants suggest criminal activity, had informants manipulating other targets of the investigation, introduced targets to each other, and then kept trying to get people to go along with like things that they were suggesting. So one of the informants, Dan Chappell, the main informant that, as I said, became basically the leader of the militia group, the Wolverine Watchmen, he suggests at one point firing rounds into the governor's house, and doing that to multiple governors' houses to send a message. He suggests at one point that they put tannerite in the driveways of governors' homes and then shoot it so it explodes in their home, and then they mail them the shell casings. Like, he suggested crazy stuff like that. And what you have is people just like...
That's a little worse than a firework.
Yeah, not going along with it. It's like, so it's the government that is like suggesting this stuff and trying to make it happen. And then you've got a group of people who are like not really going along with it. And they're saying, how can we kind of manipulate this situation to make it look like something nefarious is happening here? So when they talk about like the field training exercises or FTXs, sometimes the government refers to it as QRF, like a quick reaction force, although the Watchmen themselves never referred to their exercises as a QRF or anything like that. They called them FTX, which stood for field training exercise. It was really like the government was the one hosting these events. Their informants were the ones putting them on, basically, at their property. And then the government was basically paying for everything, inviting people out, saying it's a family-friendly event. People brought their kids. There was like swimming in pools. There's barbecuing. And then you have this kind of like militia training, or this is what these guys think that they're doing. You know, they're told they're being taught like defensive firearms training. They're also getting medical training. So there's like a medical tent. There's different kinds of things that, you know, if you know anything about like militia culture, this is sort of like normal, what you would expect militia activity to be. The only difference is that the government has provocateurs there running around, recording everybody, filming everything, and then trying to introduce conversations that, you know, sound, where they can take little sound bites that sound bad, stitch all that together and kind of create this narrative. But again, there's nothing there. It's smoke and mirrors. And once you start pulling it apart, you can see it for what it is. This is, they're doing this stuff in very like theatrical, over the top ways, right? That's the FBI's plan. It's like they're writing a movie script and they're like, who's going to make the best scary, like far right extremist militia person? Like that guy, Brandon, he's got tattoos, he's got gauged ears, and he's like, he likes heavy metal and he wears black. Like, let's get him. He's going to make a good character in our story. And that's like what they're doing. It's like they're writing a script. Their agents, one of their agents, Impala, he even said in an interrogation video of one of the FBI's own informants that they arrested, he told him after he arrested him, "We have a saying in my office: we don't let the facts get in the way of a good story." That's the FBI saying that.
That's wickedness, is what that is.
Yeah, like there's text messages from FBI Special Agent Jason Chambers, who was one of the lead handling agents on the case. He's the one that decided he was going to work it as a TEI, which stands for Terrorism Enterprise Investigation. It's like a highest threat level classification inside the FBI for their terrorism cases, which basically gives them, first of all, you have to get signed off you have to get approval from your superior. You can't just say, I'm running a TEI investigation. You have to get approval, and then it gives the agents the ability to utilize more resources of the FBI. So like the kinds of things that they utilized for this investigation was drones. They had drones following people at like 7,000 feet, like physical surveillance, following them around in their day-to-day lives. They had planes that were flying at like 15,000 feet that were following people around, like following Barry around as he's like, because he's a truck driver, as he was going around the country, you know, just doing his job. It's pretty crazy. It is.
Imagine how much money was sank into this. Just
right.
I can't even imagine with all the stuff that you just mentioned with the drones and the airplanes.
Yes.
I mean, I didn't know that aspect
not
of
just
it.
that.
I can't imagine how much money.
Pole cams installed not just at Whitmer's vacation cottage, but apparently at Pete Musico's house, possibly at Ty Garbin's property in Luther, because we've seen maps that were drawn that have come out from Discovery. Like Special Agent Impala drew a map of Pete Musico's property. Musico was one of the original founding members of the Wolverine Watchmen. He has been convicted of providing material support in a prior separate state case, because this case was actually broken up into 3 cases: a federal case with 6 defendants, and then 2 separate state cases for providing material support for terrorism. So they had a map that showed, it said Polcam, and it was a map of Musica's property. So where's the footage from that? They had one, that looks like they had a Polcam at Luther. So at Ty Garbin's property, Ty Garbin was the first person that took a plea deal in this case, in the federal case. Where's the footage from that, right? Like they spent a lot of money on this. There's a lot of, they've used a lot of resources. There's a lot of surveillance. Like, you can't show us anything of like a real plot. All you're showing us are clips of training, like government hosted, sponsored, paid for training exercises where people are getting intoxicated and stoned. And then you just film them and then stitch that together and make it look like, oh, they did something scary. And then look at their opinions, look at the things they said. You should convict them because of that. That's basically what the argument was.
Considering the amount of resources that was sank into this, do you think that there was a point where the FBI couldn't turn back because of that, even if they didn't have anything? Or do you think it was more politically motivated, before the election? Or is it both?
I think it's a little of both. So I think that what's clear from what I've seen from the discovery that is available, because another thing that should be said is most of the discovery is still under protective seal.
How
so
convenient.
We can't see. Yeah, exactly. And, there's so many questions that still we don't have answers to, which is like, how did Adam Fox meet Dan Chappell? How did they meet? Because, I was looking at the government's timeline of events. They put together this like 11-page timeline of like what they claim occurred. And one of the things that it mentioned was a phone call between Dan Chappell and Adam Fox. And it's like, how do they first get into contact with each other? It's very strange. But then you learn that the FBI has agents that are what they call, I think it's OCE, Online Covert Employee. That's what that stands for. So they have agents that are assigned to basically have fake personas online, and then they target people that the FBI wants to target. So sometimes they can be informants. There are informants that they have embedded in different like militia groups or Second Amendment groups. But they also have these online covert employees that are actual undercover FBI agents that are using fake personas. So at one point, UCE Mark is, he's a undercover covert employee. That's what UCE stands for. So OCE, Online Covert Employee, UCE Undercover agent. So UCE Mark is posing as somebody online named Mark Woods. Mark Woods is pretending to be like a militia type person. Another FBI agent, Lauren Hastings, is posing as his girlfriend online as someone named Elise Marie. And that account somehow gets into contact with Adam Fox's girlfriend, Amanda Keller. And it's very weird because it's Amanda Keller that introduces Adam to UCE Mark online. So I'll just read the direct message. This comes from Discovery. This is a Facebook DM from UCE Mark. His real name is Special Agent Mark Schwiers, but online he was posing as someone named Mark Woods. He reaches out to Adam and says, "Hey, brother, this is Mark using my girlfriend's account." The other federal agent, Elise, Lauren Hastings. Elise was talking to your fiance, Amanda, about getting more involved, and Amanda suggested I contact you. Yeah. Interesting. That was in June 22nd of 2020. That is when that undercover agent gets introduced. And this is how they do things. So they'll befriend people online and they'll work them for sometimes months to develop a relationship or an in with somebody. And then they'll manipulate events and they'll get people to show up. They'll introduce people to each other through things like this. I mean, it's why they had 12 informants and 3 undercover agents, because they had to. These were not people that knew each other really prior to this case. It's not like these defendants were had organically came together and started planning something, and then the FBI were like, oh, we have to foil this plot, and they just sent someone there to like passively observe and report back what's happening. No, it is the FBI making it happen. We have text messages from the agents to their informants saying, planning the recon of Whitmer's vacation cottage, which we hear about in the government's criminal complaint, is this recon. This is the only thing really that they can show to say that they were planning this. This was going to happen, because remember, there's no agreement. There's no audio of them agreeing to anything. And you can't really show any steps that they're taking in furtherance of an actual criminal conspiracy. So they have to try to make it happen. And the FBI says, like, invite this person to the daytime recon, invite this person, try to maximize attendance. And then they're talking to each other. The agents and the informants, they're saying, like, do you think Dan Harris will go for this? No, Dan Harris won't go for this. Okay, so maybe we don't suggest kidnapping to him, but maybe we suggest something more mild that he might be willing to go along with. They're saying this to each other in text messages. That should be the end of it. That's entrapment. Yeah. Like, as far as I'm concerned, you can't explain that. There is a text message from Chambers, the agent, to his informant, Dan Chappell, where he says, mission is to kill the governor specifically. And they are talking about the disabled Vietnam veteran, Frank Butler, who they were getting riled up and trying to get him to have forward units and like all this crazy stuff that it's just crazy. And then they tried to get him to make a household explosive. The FBI sent him a recipe to make a household thing with like Drano and sugar or something. And then they instructed him to double the ingredients. Thank God Frank didn't actually do it, because he could have blown himself up.
Yeah.
He could have killed himself and really his neighbors, so that's the kind of dangerous and stupid things the FBI is doing in their desire to pursue terrorism cases. And this is the problem, I think, with the FBI generally, and why we need to get rid of it. I'm not one of these people that thinks that it can be reformed. No, I don't believe it. It is shown that I don't think it justifies its existence. We've got 17 intelligence agencies. We have local, state law enforcement. We have DHS. We have these fusion centers. Do we really need to have like the FBI also? I don't think so. But this is what they do. It's like, in order to justify their existence, they are manufacturing these cases, and they have incentives.
And it's to justify their funding and to get more funding. They're manufacturing these events.
Right. And they need to manufacture a threat, right? There always has to be a threat to justify their existence and to get people scared so that they will give up more of their liberties in the name of safety and national security. There always has to be like an enemy. So post 9/11, it was Islamic extremism, Muslims under every corner, jihad, this, blah, 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 ISIS, Al-Qaeda. You look into who created those groups anyways, and it's like, oh, so you guys, you armed and trained and created the Mujahideen that morphed into Al-Qaeda. So you made them. You trained them to fight the Soviets back in the day. You created like a mercenary insurgent group and then left them with like all of the weapons that you gave them and trained them with. What did you think was going to happen? But it's just interesting when you consider like who actually benefited from that anyways, this like global war on terrorism. And so, after 9/11, there's the global war on terror and the excesses of that that manifest in things like extraordinary rendition, enhanced interrogation, And you don't have rights anymore. Basically, I think that Americans don't really understand what they gave up in allowing the global war on terror to happen, and then the horrific things that we know have happened at these black sites, the torture, and just the way that they're able to grab people in other countries, kidnap them. That's what extraordinary rendition is. They're black bagging people and then taking them to these black sites and holding them indefinitely. Indefinite detention is another thing, another excess from the global war on terror. What is indefinite detention? It means you don't have any rights. You don't have due process rights. You're not innocent until proven guilty. You are presumed guilty and until you can prove yourself innocent, but they don't give you the ability to mount a proper defense. So some of these terrorists, they've been holding in Guantanamo Bay and at these other sites for years without trial, without making any kind of case to prove that these people are terrorists.
Well, so Christine, you're making too much sense right now. You're talking, you're sounding kind of like a libertarian,
Yeah, well, I mean, so I've always had that opinion, even years ago. I guess now I'd be considered kind of very right wing, but 10 years ago this was kind of considered like a leftist position, it was
like
the
classic
leftists
liberal,
that were talking about this stuff, and they were the ones saying we need to shut down Gitmo and end these foreign wars, and that was what Obama campaigned on and said he was going to do. And then of course none of them do it, and they love Raytheon because now Raytheon has pride parades or whatever. So yeah, now everything's fine. Yeah. So
and now that lens, that scope has been turned inwards, and now that's domestic terrorism,
right? So the thing with the left is they will criticize law enforcement only as much as it reinforces their social justice religion, and they can criticize it from that lens and perspective. So they would criticize what the FBI was doing post 9/11 to the Muslim community, but if the victim of the FBI is not part of a special group to them, they're not interested and they don't care, and they actually think that oh no, these people deserve it, right? Because these same leftists,
it's not only that they don't care, it's that they're cheering it on, they're championing it.
Yeah, they're gleefully saying oh yeah, no, they were totally white supremacist domestic extremists that definitely wanted to kidnap Whitmer, and it's what, but yeah, so they'll complain about the FBI. They'll say systemic racism and racial profiling and this and that, and the religious discrimination of targeting the Muslim community after 9/11 and blah blah blah. So they'll say that the FBI is super corrupt, but it only to this community? Really? I don't think so. And then when it comes to targeting Trump, then no, that's justified. And how could you question their integrity? How could you question people Andrew McCabe and Peter Strzok? And you're not allowed to question people like Vindman. You can't, they have these people that they just lionize, and you're not allowed to question their integrity or something. It's funny.
Well, so you said that 2 people were acquitted. One was Brandon, and the other was Daniel. Is that correct?
Yeah, Dan Harris.
Okay, I'm familiar with Brandon, and you said that you interviewed him.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the things that you learned specifically from him that you might not have known before speaking with him? And did anything that he said surprise you?
Yes. So I learned so much from him that I didn't know. First of all, it's not clear when you're covering it, and you're not speaking to the people directly. All you have to go on is basically what the government has presented, because in this case, at least, the defense, they were not really allowed to introduce any evidence to on their side. That the judge would deny basically all of their motions. They weren't allowed to bring in any witnesses. The government threatened all of their witnesses. Every single person that they wanted to testify, the government was claiming could be charged. You know, they were unindicted co-conspirators. What that means is basically, so the government hosted these FTXs. Maybe some person like got randomly invited because they billed it as like family friendly events. So they showed up with their wife and kids. And now just because they were there, not that the government says they really did anything, but because they were there, they're an unindicted co-conspirator, because the government will basically now say, since they have framed these men for terrorism, that just because you were there, you were providing material support because you showed up. And so like for the Null brothers, they are defendants in a state case that is going to trial this August for providing material support. The government is saying they provided arms because they brought their legally owned firearms to a government sponsored FTX. And so now the government says, so because you attended this FTX, and then the people that hosted it with the help of the FBI, we framed them as terrorists and charged them as terrorists. Well, nobody's been charged with terrorism. That's another thing, but they'll say it. But anyways, they say you're providing material support. So that's the other thing. They do this with the January 6ers too. They call them insurrectionists. They'll call them terrorists or whatever, but none of them have been charged with terrorism. So they were charged with conspiracy to kidnap and like WMDs and stuff like that. And there are terrorism enhancements and there are leadership enhancements as far as sentencing goes, but they have not been charged with like DT. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So another thing that I heard you speak a little bit about in that Twitter space, I can't remember who it is, but one of the defendants is currently in jail, and you were talking about he was having difficulty even talking to his lawyer. Does that ring a bell?
Yes. Okay. So Barry and Adam were the ones that at the first trial, the jury couldn't decide. So they acquitted Daniel and Brandon. They said, yeah, yes, they were entrapped, like first certain, you know. But for Adam and Barry, they weren't quite sure. They thought, yes, but like so Barry did say some things that could be, you know, you could look at it badly, but if you understood the context, you'd be like, okay, it's totally different. And that's just another aspect to this. There are certain things that in one context are completely innocuous, but presented in a certain way can be made to look really nefarious. So for example, say that you don't know you're being watched by the FBI, but you know, you've got like your shed and you've been working on some project, you know, in your shed for a while. And you get into a fight with your wife and you tell her, you know, you're a bitch. I don't want to see you again. And you storm out. And then you go to Home Depot and purchase a hammer and some tape and some rope. You know, and some nails or whatever. And then you leave, you go back home and you go in your shed, and then the government comes and arrests you for conspiring to kill your wife. And they say, we've got you on audio. Listen to this audio. And it's you yelling at your wife, calling her a name, saying, I never want to see you again, storming out and slamming the door. Then they say, we've got you on camera at the store buying the hammer that you were going to kill her with and the tape that you were going to use to cover her mouth and the ropes. You know, we've got the receipt from the store. Do you deny it? You know, you were going to kill her. Admit it. You were conspiring to kill her. That's what they can say. And to some people, they might look at that and not knowing the context that I explained earlier, they hear this audio of this guy yelling at his wife, saying, I never want to see you again. And then they see this video of him in the store buying something scary. and there's this receipt and the government says he was planning to kill her. There are some people that to them, they might think that's plausible, right?
Sure.
But in the other context, in the other light, it's like, nope, these are two unrelated things. Just a husband get into a regular fight with his wife, and then he just went to get stuff for his stuff he's working on in the tool shed. Could be totally innocent, but can be made to look very different from what it really is. And that's also why, like, it's so interesting to me when people immediately want to rush to have like an opinion on something when we only have like a little video clip of something that happens, where there's some incident. Like, we'll just do example, like the pregnant nurse and the guy with the bike, where they fought over this bike and who reserved this bike or something. So many people were on, either side of that were rushing to condemn this woman or condemn the kid. And it's like, you really don't know the full context of that situation. You could be totally wrong. Why are you rushing to, comment on something you really don't know anything about?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to talk a little bit about the documentary before we show the teaser?
Oh yeah. And just to go back. So I kind of went off on a tangent, but Adam and Barry were in they were mistrial, first trial. They were retried again, just the two of them. The government really controlled that, so they got their convictions. I had been interviewing them for the documentary prior to their sentencing, at Barry's sentencing in particular. So the night before his sentencing, I asked him, do you have anything that you want to say before your sentence tomorrow? Like, do you want to make a statement? You want me to record it? I'll put it out there on my channel. I don't know how many people will see it, but I just wanted to give him a chance to have a voice, right? And he said yes. So I put out a statement. He made a statement. I kind of put it out on my channel, and the next day, his sentencing. So I put it out at like 8:00 at night. His sentencing was the next morning at like 9:30 or 10 in the morning. And the prosecutor was quoting from his statement, like, that I put out on my channel. They were saying that he is unrepentant. He's completely radicalized. He won't take responsibility. He's talking to the media. In fact, just last night, he gave an interview to the media, and he was saying that the FBI framed him. He is still like not taking responsibility. So if you don't admit to something you didn't do, like, oh, now you're not taking responsibility. And they said that he was unrepentant and completely radicalized. And then they likened him to the blind sheik. And they claimed he was the spiritual leader of the group, which we've never heard before, because it's like, where does this religious component even come into? Like, this wasn't like
just another angle that they're going to try.
They just make this stuff up because they're used to like doing this to Muslims and saying that they're part of like ISIS or Al Qaeda. They make up this stuff like spiritual leader. What does it mean? Was he administering like religious rights to people in the group? What is a spiritual
They
leader?
didn't update the playbook.
It means nothing. It's so bizarre. But like, for years, the government claimed that Adam Fox, the homeless man that was living in the basement of the vac shack, was the ringleader of the group. They give him 16 years. The next day they sentence Barry. And again, it's right after he's given me a statement. And they say, actually, Barry was the real ringleader because he was the spiritual leader. And he's really the one responsible. It's like, what? You didn't even try to argue that at court. Now you're at a sentencing and there's no one who can like push back on your lies. So you're just making stuff up. And they're like, oh, when Barry talked about wanting to restore the constitutional republic, that's no different than ISIS talking about how they want to restore the caliphate. And it's like, what? And then they're like, oh, and when he talked about the founding fathers, which are a myth. And it's like, wait a second. This is the prosecutor, Nils Kessler, saying this. Like, I'm sorry, sir. Don't you take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution? And now you're calling it a myth. And you're likening the founding of the country to like ISIS. that, you know, it's this nonsensical stuff. Like Barry has "We the People" tattooed on his arm, and they didn't like that. His lawyer told him not to mention the Constitution because this is going to be silly sounding, but anybody that knows Barry will tell you that, like, Barry loves the Constitution and the founding fathers, and he's super knowledgeable about all this stuff. So anytime you talk to Barry, he cannot help himself. He's going to talk about the Constitution and the founding fathers. He's going to quote them at some point or whatever. And they're basically saying that the founding fathers are like terrorists. You know, they're saying if you mention 1776, like they have all these labels now and like symbols that they now claim are like extremism symbols. So Barry has like the 3% tattooed on his hand, and they were saying it's a gang affiliation. The government is now saying that symbol that many law enforcement and like military, that like military law enforcement have and wear, they're now calling it like gang affiliation. And it's like, what? It is some of the craziest. I've never experienced anything like that. And I was shocked because I was listening into his sentencing hearing, because the night before I told him, I said, Barry, you know, they're not going to like that you've been participating in this documentary. You know that. And we talked about how they might try to use his sentencing to punish him for that. And that looked like it's exactly what happened. They gave him more time than Adam, who they claimed was the ringleader. They made up that he's a spiritual leader like the blind. They said he was like the blind sheik, and which was weird. And so after his sentencing, he got 20 years. I met with him again and I interviewed him and I said, what do you think is going on? Do you know when you're going to be moved? Because, you know, we'd been filming. I wanted to get his full story while I was able to, because I had a feeling that as soon as that they're going to try to shut this guy up, you know?
Sure.
And so I asked him, why don't you write a statement to the weaponization committee? I don't know if I can get it to them. I have a very small platform, but it can't hurt, right? And so he said, okay. And he worked on it. He wrote a 4-page thing basically outlining why he felt the weaponization committee should look into his case. He brought up what he believed was weaponization and how they did it. And he read his statement to the committee, and I filmed it and I published that video. And I asked Adam to do a statement as well. And Adam was writing his statement at that time. So, as soon as I published Barry's statement, the next day, Adam and Barry both got moved to Supermax. They got shipped out of Newaygo County, both sent to Supermax. Adam was shipped to Florence in Colorado. Barry was sent to Terre Haute in Indiana. And these prisons are for like killers, like El Chapo and Terry Nichols are at Florence, where Adam is. It's people who are basically serving life sentences already and also have been a problem or are involved in like serious organized criminal activity, like multiple time killers or whatever. So like for Adam and Barry to go there, Adam has had 0 criminal record and he committed no violent crime. They claimed he conspired to kidnap a governor, but no crime occurred. Like nobody was actually kidnapped because it wasn't actually going to happen anyways. But the point is that nothing actually happened. You know what I mean? So that should be taken into account when sending people to these facilities. I could see maybe sending them to like a federal prison or something, but to send them to Supermax seems totally unjustified. And if you look at the criteria as well for the Supermax, it doesn't seem like they would fit there or that they should be sent there. And it's like, well, what's the justification for sending these guys there? Why was it right after they did, you know, I put out Barry's statement to the weaponization committee? That seemed highly unusual because, you know, I don't know for sure. I think someone would be able to find this out though. What is the usual time frame for when somebody is sentenced to when they're moved out of Newaygo County? Because Brandon told me when he was in there that he saw people would get sentenced and they were usually there for at least a couple weeks, if not sometimes a few months before they were moved to their final destination. So if that's the time frame, then it seems like this was expedited, and it seems retaliatory for their participation in the documentary. And moreover, as you said, they're being prevented from speaking to people. So when they were at Newaygo County, they were allowed to have phone calls with their family. As long as they had the money in their commissary, they could make calls. So it's like $5 for a 15-minute phone call. And so they were able to call their families, but they get the 15-minute phone calls. They were able to do video visits, 40-minute long video visits. That was fine, apparently. And they were able to do that for a while. Now, all of a sudden, they get moved to the Supermax, and they're not allowed to have phone calls anymore. They get one 15-minute phone call per month.
Wow.
No video visits, nothing like that. And then their ability to communicate, like, and write letters, is also limited because they don't give them stamps. They don't give them envelopes. They get a 3-inch long rubber pencil to write with, which is just, it's insane. You know, try to do that. Take a pencil, break it. It's not going to be rubber, but try to write with a 3-inch pencil. So they make it impossible for these guys to communicate with their families. Barry is being sent to the CMU, which is the communications management unit of the prison. They won't really say why, but if you look at the criteria for being sent to the CMU, that is designed for people who are basically, you would go to the CMU if you were like an international terrorist and there was some risk of you still carrying out criminal, like, terrorist acts from prison, like being a shot caller or something, right? Like, telling other people, like giving them the okay to carry out crimes or something. It's why they have like a rule that you can't speak Arabic on the phone. You have to be speaking in English, because these prisons were built after 9/11 and they were supposedly to be for like Al-Qaeda terrorists, but they're not. That's not what they're being used for. And there's zero oversight. There's no accountability. They don't say why was he being sent to CMU? Because first they said he was going to go to AdMax. Now they're saying CMU. Why is he being sent to the CMU? And again, that is designed to highly restrict his ability to communicate with anybody. They don't want him talking to media. They don't want him gaining notoriety from prison, which is just insane, because again, Barry is not a terrorist. He's not an international terrorist. He was a truck driver from Delaware. He has 3 daughters, a fiance, an elderly mother. He didn't commit a violent crime. This is insane. But it shows, though, that the lengths they're going to try to shut him specifically up should be terrifying to people, because I think they're trying to get him killed. And that's my concern, and preventing him from being able to communicate. And he told me, by the way, that this was going to happen. He actually predicted that they would silence him. They'd prevent us from speaking. Eventually, they'd prevent us from even being able to write letters. And then he said there will be an accident that happens in prison and he'll disappear, and we'll never hear from him again. And it's been, I thought he was being a little bit paranoid, because anybody would be if you've been in prison conditions and you're still in prison. And, I thought maybe he was being kind of paranoid. And then the things he said were going to happen started happening. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is insane. And other things happened around that same time also, to me personally, that I think were intimidation techniques or tactics, and a provocation that I will not ignore. So it's just kind of like, it's been crazy.
What were those things?
I don't want to talk about it, but
okay,
we'll just say soft raid on my home.
Oh, wow. Well, you brought this up, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but one of the reasons that you had moved someone to Supermax that is undeserving of that is to put them in harm's way, and that would be my guess towards it, and to silence them, of course.
Yes, exactly. To put them in a CMU, tightly controlled communications. The other thing that's also going on too is it's a psychological technique to break these men spiritually, to make them feel like they have no hope and to completely demoralize them so that they give up trying to get their story out, and to talk to me and things, like that. I think that that's a big issue. I think that they know they messed up with this case. They don't like to lose. And the narrative on it is falling apart so fast that I think that they're terrified because they remember this is still an ongoing criminal matter. We have another state case coming to trial in August with 3 guys. So this is still ongoing. And I think that they see these guys getting their story out there as a threat to that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the last thing that you want if you're the government and you don't have a rock solid case against these people is to have them speak out and tell their story.
Right. Or to have somebody making a documentary
exactly.
about it. Yeah. Right.
Well, do you want to say anything about the documentary before we share that trailer?
So I just want to say I am super proud of the trailer. There's still a lot to be done. It's a massive project. Just to kind of explain the timeline of events here, we're talking about several years. We're talking about 14 men that were arrested in October of 2020. We're talking about FTXs that sometimes had 30 to 40 people maybe at them, 20, 30 different people. So we're talking about lots of witnesses, lots of unindicted co-conspirators. It's a massive story to try to piece together things that happened because there's so many holes in the government story. There's so many things that we still don't know. And the purpose of the documentary is to fill in that background information from primary sources and so people can understand the full context of that story. So the trailer basically is it doesn't give away everything that you're going to get from the documentary, but it does give you a good idea of what to expect.
Awesome. Let's get it going. I'm going to make it full screen. That.
Earlier today, Attorney General Dana Nessel was joined by officials from the Department of Justice and the FBI to announce state and federal charges against 13 members.
Oh, no.
I'm not sure why that's not playing volume.
I can hear it.
Oh, you can?
Yeah, I can hear it.
Oh, weird. I could not hear it at all.
Oh, it's so strange.
Let me start over. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
All right, here we go.
Earlier today, Attorney General Dana Nessel was joined by officials from the Department of Justice and the FBI to announce state and federal charges against 13 members of 2 militia groups who were preparing to kidnap and possibly kill me.
We're grateful to the FBI and law enforcement who discovered these domestic terrorists and stopped them. It's the sort of behavior you might expect from ISIS.
You might see a number that high in a sprawling narcotics conspiracy that stretches from coast to coast and beyond. That's a pretty high number in a case like this. It really reflects how deeply the government has been diving into this investigation to try to make these cases.
It was just literally a bunch of working class guys who on the weekend got together and exercised their rights and trained with firearms. So the FBI says, hey, we'll just pay for everything.
Who arranged the meeting? The FBI's paid provocateur. Robeson was getting paid to set this stuff up.
So they make the route, they set the locations, they make the plan, they do everything. And Adam's literally just sitting in the basement of a vacuum repair shop smoking blunts all day.
You're going to hear that my client was the leader of this group. But I think you're also going to hear that there was an election held to identify the leader, and it was Dana.
How can I frame this social situation to make this naive person appear to be a dangerous, violent terrorist? The whole goal was for the FBI to spend millions of dollars to create militia groups, record them saying offensive stuff, and then frame them in a fake conspiracy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I will also put that link in the description whenever we re-upload this to YouTube.
Oh, awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as you can see from the trailer, like it says, the story there, they claimed 2 militia groups were planning to kidnap and kill her. Like, no, there was one militia group that wasn't planning anything, and then the FBI took over the group. By the way, the Wolverine Watchmen was like a mostly online group. It was founded by Joe Morrison and Pete Musico in November of 2019. By March of 2020, the FBI had taken over the group. So, yeah, their informant becomes the XO of the group, basically the commanding officer. He's the one doing all of the training. And then Pete and Joe are sort of like figureheads that are not really involved in things. That's why they're charged, not federally, they're charged in the state case for quote unquote providing material support. It's because they couldn't sustain federal charges on them because like the FBI basically just took over their group and started doing the training and making the training much more militant because their informant, Dan Chappell, actually was military. He was a real Iraq War veteran. He told them all kinds of stories that weren't true, handing up his service record. Like, he told these guys he was part of the elite unit that helped rescue American hero Chris Kyle, like the sniper. So these guys thought that Dan was like super cool because none of them had any military experience. Pete Musico was like a Marine reservist or something, but I believe he was like a mechanic. He hadn't seen combat or anything like that. So for these guys, like when Dan came around, the informant, he's the only person that has that kind of training, and they really look up to him and they think he's like really a cool guy, and he's pretending he's some kind of operator and trying to impress these people. And then of course they say stupid things trying to impress him.
What is the end game for you with not only this documentary, but just your journalism on this specifically?
This case is very important to me, not just personally, because I've gotten to know the families of these people and I've gotten to know some of these people. And I feel like if people don't know the truth about something this big, right? This was a big case. It's gotten national attention. Think about how many other similar cases there are like this with the same level of corruption, but we just don't know about it because it isn't sexy. It's not like conspiring to kidnap a governor. That's everyone's going to want to talk about that, right? At least the national media. This case got national press attention, but it was negative attention. And of course, it was all coming from the government and parroting the government narrative on it. And so I want to show the other side of that. I want to show some answers to some of these questions that we still have. And I want to point out the questions of this. And I also would like to push to have all of the discovery unsealed. It is only the government that wants that stuff sealed, by the way. I've talked to the guys, and I know some of them have spoken. Brandon has said, unseal it, release it all, let everybody see it and come to their own conclusion. It's just the government that wants that sealed. Why might that be, right? This case, as far as I understand, at least the federal case has been adjudicated, right? Adam and Barry are appealing their convictions to the Sixth Circuit, but the appeals process could take a long time, possibly years. And again, an appeal is not relitigating the case. What the appeal does is say there are some legal issues, technical issues, right? Like maybe the judge made an incorrect ruling on one thing, or there was a couple issues with that. But from what I understand, they're not being able to really communicate with their appeals lawyers, and their appeals lawyers do not seem concerned about their conditions of their confinement. They're not really and as far as I can see, doing anything to help them. They themselves have said we're not relitigating the case. When asked about why are you not pushing to have the Sixth Circuit look at Judge Yonkers' bogus hearsay ruling, which was early on in the case that prevented the defense from being able to get an exculpatory evidence. If I think that what needs to happen is a civil case here, a civil suit, because unfortunately, if they're not going to relitigate and we can't get some of this stuff in, like all of the stuff that they wanted to get in, that way and get the court to re-examine it that way, what other options you have? Like, I think that one of the things we need is the communications, the cell phone records from the informants and the handling agents. I want to know about burner phones because I believe that they were communicating with each other via burner phones. And I think that there's reason to suspect that. We know Special Agent Christopher Long was communicating with informant Jenny Plunk using a Proton email drafts folder to avoid a paper trail. Well, why are you doing stuff like that if you are conducting a legitimate investigation? Why would you need to go to lengths to avoid a paper trail? I thought you had a duty as law enforcement to preserve the chain of custody and the evidence of everything. So what's with the draft folder? Oh, well, they will make up an excuse that, just in case, in case something happened and someone discovered the informant's identity, the draft email system. No, that's not what it was. It was not to protect this person's identity as an informant. Like, if we texted her on the phone, someone could see, but they wouldn't see this email draft folder. Who's looking at her emails? Like, in no way was that ever a thing. What they were doing is avoiding, it's what these federal agencies do. They want to avoid having to have any of their evidence of their corruption in their own documentation. So something that they'll do is, instead of doing something themselves, the government will pay a private contracting firm to do it for them so that you can't find out when you're doing FOIA requests. Unless you already have some information about that, because you have to tailor your FOIAs in a certain way. But they'll have these, private contracting firms do stuff that they don't want people to know about. So I also wonder about, we know that there were 12 informants in this case, maybe even more, but I kind of wonder, these are like FBI informants. What if they're contracting, using these private intelligence firms and contracting them to run informants that way? Like, there'd be another layer of obfuscation. And you can look at some of these private intelligence firms. They say they offer services like that. They even brag about infiltrating groups, right-wing groups or whatever.
Wow. And
so I think that what happens is oftentimes, like, look at these sedition hunters, right? Who are they really? I think that these federal agencies will work with NGOs. They will work with groups like Antifa to do things like this, right? To get background information on people, to infiltrate groups, because Antifa is already doing that anyways. They talk about it, they brag about it, same as these NGOs and private intelligence companies. I looked at a couple of them that I had researched that were very concerning. Like, they openly brag about this, about doing this stuff. So yeah, I think that's scary. Like, imagine if something like this happened again, but we weren't able to show that the federal government used 12 informants, because instead of using FBI informants, they're using private contracting firms, and there's no way to know. Like, imagine if something, and then you just think, how many times has
don't
that
give them
happened?
ideas,
You don't
Christina.
know about it. Oh, they are smarter than me, trust me. The idea that they're incompetent, that's sort of like the meme that goes on, because some of the stuff that they've done in the case is so stupid, or they make that what appear to be amateur mistakes. And I think that is, I start to wonder if that's part of their psyops.
Yeah, it could
making you
be.
think that they're just like these bumbling idiots, you know. But in another sense, it's like they're really not, though, are they? Because these men are behind bars for the most part. Only 2 escaped their clutches so far. So in that regard, they're actually quite efficient, and that should be terrifying to people. And I think that they almost want this image out there of them just being, oh, you know, we just can't get these hoaxes done properly. You know, look, we're just not good at this. Really?
Yeah.
No, I think you're quite efficient and quite terrifying in the rapid way that you mobilize the entire federal apparatus to go after grandmothers that paraded in the building there in January for 15 minutes and stayed inside the velvet ropes or something, you know?
Well, they nearly don't even have to be intelligent if all the arms of the state are captured, essentially, and in
Yeah.
agreement with each other. You know, they can make those mistakes and still get away with it, essentially.
Yeah, and I think that there's still this naivete in the mind of the American people where they are taught very young that there are these separation of powers and that this is unique to America and that they provide this checks and balances on each other, right? This separation of these branches of the government. And it's like, okay, but what about the national security apparatus? What branch do they fall under? Legislative, executive, judiciary, what? And how are these groups providing checks and balances on each other? Does the judiciary ever provide a check or balance on like Congress? No, not really. For the most part, they go along with the agenda. They're the ones that are like gleefully assisting the federal government in their schemes. Like Judge Yonker, he denied almost every defense motion in this case. Even after the case was over, he went and made some statement talking about how great the FBI is. You know, it's like, it's just insane. The idea.
Well, you had
that,
Merrick
like,
Garland today or yesterday. I think it might have been yesterday, saying that, you know, people questioning the integrity of the FBI is like an attack on, what do you say, freedom,
democracy or something.
democracy. Yeah,
It's a threat to democracy,
yeah, threat to
right?
democracy. Yeah,
Because it's causing mistrust in institutions. And it's like, yeah, but if you're criminalizing questioning your authority, isn't that causing mistrust? Like if you have to criminalize questioning you, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not looking too good for you. It's kind of like, you know, how there are how they try to get these hate speech laws or hate crime laws through. And it's like, so if you have to criminalize people like criticizing you and you have to force them to love you, maybe you should look in the mirror.
Well, it's very reminiscent of the COVID regime too.
Mhm.
You know, you couldn't question anything about
Exactly.
that. And
Right,
now
or
you can't
you're-
question the FBI without being a
Exactly.
threat to democracy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Isn't that interesting how that works?
Well, we're coming up on nearly an hour and a half, Christina. I'm a huge fan of your work, and I can't wait to see the rest of the documentary. Do you want to plug anything before we go?
Yeah, sure. So I'll say that right now, I'm trying to wrap up my final interviews for the documentary, which involves extensive travel and it costs a lot of money. So we are still fundraising for the documentary. I'm thinking that the best way to do this, so I've got to go to several different states and they're not close to each other. So I had to go like this way and then that way and then this way. So if I'm thinking I do it all at once and try to turn it into like a road trip or something. Because I was just thinking, do I want to buy plane tickets, rent a car, pay for a hotel for 5 different places, make 5 different trips? Or what if I just did one trip and I just like hit all of the places? And instead of having to buy 5 plane tickets, I don't have to buy any. And I just do I rent an RV or something. But I was looking into that, and oh my God, it's so expensive. It's like $130 to $200 a day. And that does not include gas or anything. And I was like, oh my gosh. But
I haven't done the math yet, but that might be more expensive than just plane tickets.
I know, but well, so if I'm getting them on short notice, I don't know. And then I also have like film crew people too. So it's multiple plane tickets. It's not just one. Gotcha. So I don't know. It might be cheap. It's just it's a pain in the butt. And I've never been in an RV, but like I am not an outdoorsy person. So it's just like, oh God, this is going to be horrifying, I bet. Things
do you have a GoFundMe or what's the alternative platform for that? GiveSendGo?
Yes, if you go to the website, it's just knkfilm.com. I have it right under my name there. There's a donation page. There's a page that says donate. We have a GiveSendGo there. If you want to donate, people can donate anonymously. So you don't have to be scared you're going to get on a list or something. Although, let's be real, we're probably all on like a list at this point. But yeah, so right now I'm trying to do one more fundraising push before I make my final round of trips. And then after I get these last interviews, then we just shift into the editing process. So maybe we can, if we can get this funded, this last round of interviews and trips, maybe we can get the documentary completed by the end of the year. That would be amazing. I would love that to happen. So just the quicker we can get the funding, like the quicker we can get the project done. So it's just, it's rough. It's a hard thing to do, taking on a project like this in, I think any sense is going to be difficult, but to tell a story like this is insane. For example, right, the government claims that these guys were going to kidnap her, and like they went up to her cottage and they wanted to see, like, they said something like they were going to, I guess, somehow transport her across the lake in a boat or something, and then have another boat meet them. And then like no one even knows, like when the FBI was pressed about like, well, how were they going to do that and when, and what was the plan here?
Whose boats?
Whose boat? And then are they going to go in Lake Michigan in October? Because the FBI claims these guys wanted to do this before the election, and it's like, so when then? In October, they're going to kidnap her, and then they're going to go across Lake Michigan in the middle of winter or something with the choppy waters, and then somehow get her to where? Wisconsin, where your informant Steve Robeson lives? Like, what? It just is nuts. It's crazy. So anyways, I want to go show people though, because they claim that during this like fake night recon that the FBI drove these people to and told them they were doing land navigation training. They say that at one point when they're doing this recon, there's other people on the other side of the lake and they're trying to signal to each other or something, like with flashing a light. And I'm pretty sure it's that isn't possible, what their agents described on the stand. So I actually want to go up to the lake and show people what it really looks like, so they can get an idea of like, is this even physically possible? Like this narrative that is being alleged here. And I just think that people need to see these places to understand like what is really being alleged here, so they can see how kind of crazy and like not even possible this was, and really how stupid. So that's another part of this, is like going up to this lake and trying to get footage there in addition to everywhere else. So I have to go back to Michigan again, and I've already been there twice. So it'll be fun, but yeah. That's it. That's the only thing really. You can find everything about the documentary from the website. I try to be very like responsive to people. If anyone has any questions or if anyone wants to help, I've had people offer, that everybody has things that they're good at, I guess. People have offered to like do music for the documentary and stuff. So if anyone has anything, if you want to offer to help in any way, we have contact information on the website. There's a contact page with an email address. You can get a hold of us that way. And there's also an about page. You can read more about the project there and get find our social medias, and then you'll get up to date with every time I put out an update.
Awesome. Well, everybody go donate. And if you have any special skills, go offer that.
Yes.
I'm going to put links in the description when we're done here. And everybody go follow Christina on Twitter, which is one of my favorite follows.
Oh, thank
All
you. I appreciate that.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Guys, remember, if anybody offers to train you, it's probably a Fed. See ya.